In this video, I thought I'd go over all the equipment that I take with me to shoot wedding videos. Now, I do take a lot with me. I don't necessarily use it all on every wedding, but this is all the stuff that I bring with me that I might need. I've got my main bag, which has stuff that I'll use most of the time. I've got a backup bag, which is stuff that I might need. And then I've got other things like tripods and lights in the car if needed. This is mostly down to whether I'm shooting a church wedding, whether I'm shooting at just a wedding venue, how long the day is, what's involved. I just like to know I've got all the kit I need and hopefully won't be missing out on anything. To shoot this video, I'm using my S5 II, which is my B cam I use for gimbals and second angles, and my 35mm 1.8 lens. And then up above on the really great bird's eye view is my C cam, which is the Lumix S5, and my 20 to 60mm kit lens, which I actually do use quite a lot, especially for sort of safety angles, sometimes for gimbal shots, especially for establishing shots. Enough waffle for me, let's go over the first bag, which is my main one. This is the Lowepro Flipside 500 AW2. This has been an excellent investment, definitely a really worthwhile bag. It fits everything I need in it. You can immediately see that I'm missing two cameras, so the S5 II would usually go there, the S5 would go there, or vice versa. Usually I'll leave the 20 to 60 on my S5 II because I know I'll need it at the start of the day. And then usually the S5 has the 50mm on, which I usually use to look down the aisle. My A cam, my primary cam, is this, the Lumix S5 II with a tilter cage on it, which I never used to have, but I've been quite enjoying using a cage. My go-to lens is the Sigma 24-70 f2.8. I use that for most of the day. It just does everything I need, really. I can get reasonably good depth of field, I can get good low light, and I don't have to constantly be switching cameras or switching lenses. I'll use this basically up until and including the ceremony. And I'll usually take this one handheld, while the B cam is at the front on a wide angle, and C cam is usually at the back looking down the aisle. Although a lot of the time I have to wait till the brides come down the aisle to get the aisle shot, so I have to basically leave C cam off to one side, and as soon as the bride's down the aisle, I then put it down the aisle so I'm not blocking the way or anything. I normally rig this up with a top handle and a side handle. I've kind of mixed and matched here, so I've got the Nitsy basic side handle with the Arri rosette attachment, and I've got this top handle came with a tilter cage when I bought it, and that's basically my rig. Sometimes I do use a monitor, which I'll show you later, and actually I'm using it a bit more these days because my neck is starting to hurt from looking down at the screen all the time. The only downside, obviously, with this setup without using the screen is if I want to flip the screen, I have to have it at an angle, otherwise it hits the handle. But it works really well for what I use. It's nice to have an extra point of contact when I'm doing sort of handheld moving shots, and if I'm not using a gimbal. Otherwise, I can still put my hand underneath here and zoom and do a bit of rack focus as well as using autofocus. And yeah, generally it's just been a fantastic camera. What's nice about it is, even though I don't necessarily use all the SSD recording and stuff for weddings, it means that I have the option for commercial shoots, anything that's more like studio based. To be honest, I only use the basic 4K setting on this, but that's plenty. And as long as you get your white balance and exposure generally right in camera, it's pretty forgiving, and you wouldn't really notice any quality difference unless you're doing crazy stuff with color grading. You'll also probably notice on all my equipment that I do tend to like labeling stuff. Now, that's partly just because I got a new label maker and I kind of just enjoyed labeling everything. However, I will say that normally I use these cameras for bigger productions, especially doing multicam video shoots, where I have other guys who bring their Lumix cameras, and it's quite easy to get them mixed up. So just having my initials and what it is just kind of useful so I don't mix up my kit with, say, some of my mates. Okay, next up here we have a little phone attachment by Ulanzi. And then lastly, in this little section here, we have a little tiny air blower, always comes in handy. One of many microfiber cloths and a Sharpie. For some reason it's purple. These can be quite useful. You never know when you're going to need to mark something. Moving down along here, we have, this is basically my go-to lens. This is the Sigma 85 1.4, labeled of course. This is really what I use for couple portraits and candid shots. I did try the 70 to 200, but it's just so heavy, and I didn't really get on with it. I would still like to get something a bit longer, but actually 85 for the most part is pretty good. And then if I need more reach, I can just use APS-C crop mode. Further down, we have the 50, labeled of course. This would usually be on this camera here, my S5. but it's obviously here for now. I do swap lenses around a little bit, but generally speaking, it's just a good sort of looking down the aisle lens. It's tight enough, but it's wide enough that you're not going to be in trouble if you just leave it and they suddenly move to one side. They'll still be within frame. I don't tend to use my 50 all that much. I might start using it a bit more, but generally speaking, it's just a good lens to have if I ever need it. Coming down here, we have one of two MKE 200 little shotgun mics. Now, I'm not actually using this that much because I don't tend to use a lot of on-camera audio. Sometimes though, I will have bookings where they've got, you know, longer videos, sort of 20-30 minute videos, and I might want to use a bit more on-camera audio. So in those instances where I know I'm going to do that, I will use this. And then below that we have just a USB-C charging cable. Down here would normally be one of the other cameras, and then in here I have a couple of Allen keys for some of my camera grip equipment, which means I can tighten up my camera cage or any accessories and stuff that require it. And then in here, I always keep my business cards. So just in case anyone asks, I can go, ah, yes, I do have business cards. Coming down here then, so we have, firstly, I'll show, I've got just a ton of spare batteries. Underneath there is a charger as well. And then in here, I've got my Hollyland Lark Max Mark II. Now I'm actually using that to record my audio currently. Being honest, I'm not using these much yet. I bought them recently. They're not my main kind of go-to microphone, but I've been quite impressed with them so far. The sound quality in this has been fairly impressive so far. I'm just sort of not totally sure that I want to totally switch to using these over my main audio devices, which are in here, and I'll show you next. So the top pouch, first things first, these are my main audio devices. Anyone who does videography in the UK will know about these. These are, of course, the Sony TX650s. I've got 4 of them at the moment. I'm not going to turn them over because it's actually got my address on the back, because it's very easy for registrars especially to walk home with them. So I actually have my address printed on the back just in case. But these are great. They just, you know, go in the top pocket here. You can use them for ambient audio. I've just been really impressed with them. They've got a 660 version, which I think is slightly better and has USB-C rather than micro USB. But to be honest, these have been great. And then I've also got a couple of the little handheld microphone clip-on things, so I can just sort of capture audio directly. I never really tend to get audio from like the mixing desk, because if you get wireless interference, you're done for. So I'd rather just capture audio directly onto the actual handheld mic, and 99% of the time it sounds great. In here, again, another microfiber cloth. I've just got them everywhere. In here, these are the lav mics that go with the Hollyland Lark Maxes. They're all right. They're not as good as I'd hoped, but they're better than like the cheap ones, and I could probably EQ them to sound decent. The last little extra bits that we have in here, we've got a slightly higher quality Rode lav mic, which I use occasionally, but more for commercial shoots. Memory card holder, spare memory cards. There's actually a load more, but they're all on my computer at the moment. I always carry electrical tape, because if you get a wired microphone, using those microphone attachments is a bit of a nightmare, so I usually just tape it on. Penknife, really good, because you would be surprised how often in bridal prep the bride or one of the bridesmaids has like a tag or like a bit of thread or something that he's cutting off. This is very useful. And then lastly, earplugs. I've had a few ringing ear moments, so I always carry earplugs now. I've got a load of ND filters here. I'm absolutely an 180-degree rule like snob. I hate cranking shutter, so I insist on using these. They generally work pretty well. These are the Earth. They were called Gobe, they're now called Earth. They're pretty good, although I do find they don't agree with all lenses. The 85, it just wasn't playing ball, it was getting a little blurry. So on my 85 here, I've actually got a K&F Concept Nano X, and that seems to work better. So I might switch at some point. In here, I've got the spare camera straps, which to be honest, I don't really tend to use, but if I've got a second shooter who is worried about breaking my stuff, then I just got a bunch of camera straps with carabiners for quick release. You never know when you're going to need some paracetamol, so I've always got it like strategically placed in all my bags. And then I've got a pretty big USB-C charging bank. This is good for phones. If my camera's running low and I've got nowhere to plug it in, I'll normally just plug it in on the camera, tape it to the tripod leg, and that will just keep it going if I'm running out of battery. Okay, and then flipping over, there's not really much to show on the other side of this. I don't really carry a lot. I've got a bit of spare medication. You just never know when you're going to need it. And I've also got my EpiPen. I'd carry one in my pocket as well. I've got a severe peanut allergy. It's a pain, so I always have to tell all the venues and it is just, it's what it is, but I always have spares on me because usually if ever I did have a reaction, which I luckily haven't as an adult, I only ever had one when I was 2, but if I was to have a reaction, I would need probably more than one. And then clipped on the side is my trusty old gimbal. Now, when I say old, I mean old. This is my original Ronin SC, and it's done very well, to be honest. It is starting to show signs of not working as well. I can't use the tilt up and down function. I can only use it in just sort of the standard mode, and then I actually have to physically, if I want to look up, I have to use the joystick. I can't tilt it up anymore. I think that's mode 2 that it's defaulted to. I've always had all my equipment set with these Manfrotto 323 quick release plates. It just works for me, so I always put one of these adapters on any gimbal I own or any piece of equipment where I'm going to use my camera, like tripods and stuff. Next up, we have the backup bag. This is a pretty cheap K&F concept camera bag. It's okay. You will probably notice it's fraying a little bit, but it's still pretty good. This is basically where I keep all the kind of backup stuff, or the stuff that's not necessarily immediately in use or that I can live without. So I usually bring actually 4 cameras. I've got a backup in here. This is my original S5, which I've had for a couple of years now. It's still great, the image is still great, the autofocus maybe not, but if anything went wrong with any of my other cameras and I needed an extra angle, then I've got this. Or if I'm at a church wedding and it's a particularly challenging one, then at least I do actually have an extra angle if needed. I've got a spare MK200 microphone, again, if needed. This is something I haven't really used yet. You might have seen in a previous video. Rode obviously has a branded one, and this will work with Holyland mics or with a DJI mic. I'm thinking about doing some guest testimonials, so I just thought, you know, hold it and speak kind of thing might be quite good. There's a spare cover there, so I might get a second. Spare USB-C charger, mini Manfrotto Pixie tripod thing, again, can be useful for lights and stuff. Then what have we got here? Oh, I never really used this. It's the Tascam DR05, it was the first audio device I had. Again, probably more likely to use it on a commercial shoot. If I was desperate and needed extra ambient audio, then I've got one of these. A few spare charging bits. This is a MPF charger. This is a sort of cheaper USB-C charger for the Lumix batteries. We've got a bunch of MPF batteries. I think I've got 6 of the MPF 970s. That powers lights and my monitor. This is the monitor that I tend to use. I don't use it all the time, but I'm using it more again because of my neck craning issue. It's a problem with being tall and having bad posture, which I'm trying to work on. This is the Blackmagic Video Assist 12G. This is the 5-inch version that I recently bought. I've actually also got the 7-inch version, so maybe a bit overkill. The thing is, I'm not using this to record Blackmagic RAW for weddings. It would just be ridiculous amounts of data, but I wanted the ability to shoot Blackmagic RAW because it's a really nice format, and shooting, you know, higher end music videos and stuff in that format's really good. It also turns out though that this is just a really, really nice bright monitor, really clear. The 5-inch definitely makes more sense for weddings. I've got the 7-inch for sort of bigger production stuff when I rig the camera out, but this 5-inch is perfect. And it just adds a bit of height to the camera, so when I want a low angle but I don't want to crane my neck, I can have it at sort of, you know, a couple of inches above the camera. And yeah, this thing's been pretty good so far, and I normally just run it off one MPF battery and swap it when need to, just to keep the weight down. Last of the main bit, so this is literally the only light I use for weddings these days. It's bright enough. In the summer you don't really need to worry that much because you normally have a bit of daylight, but this will usually just add a little bit of balanced light. If you know, if the DJ's got colored lights and it's just creating a weird cast, I normally throw this up just behind to create a bit of edge light and just sort of have a white color to balance off of. You know, it's pretty bright, you can see there, you know, that's about half brightness and go full the way. It's got daylight and tungsten functions. So yeah, just this cheap little Yongyo light. It's served me very well, and I'll probably just keep using it again until it dies. In here I have a few extra spare Lumix batteries. We've got a couple of monitor mounts. I've recently bought this one because I can tighten it. Batteries, cables, spare electrical tape, and these tablets here I'm not going to show too much, but I get migraines quite bad, so I always keep them here. And the very final bag is of course the drone bag. What I'll tend to do is when I arrive at the venue, I'll get some shots to start with, and then if there's time later on when everyone's eating, I'll get some more, but generally speaking I try and get it done first so I at least have some shots. It's the same with doing couple shots, even if it's like harsh sunlight, I try to get a couple, or I try and see if the photographer's happy to get a couple, because it means if it rains, it's England, it will probably rain at some point, then at least you're not screwed because you tried to wait for the perfect sunset shot for everything. So I'm using the Mini 3 Pro. I've got my operator ID on here, and I've also got my one for Ireland and EU mainland, so it means I can fly there as well. Yeah, Mini 3 Pro is pretty great. Again, I'll do a review on it at some point. Spare battery, and again, I'm a 180-degree rule snob. I have to have my ND filters, 1/50 shutter always. So that's really the main stuff that's in my bags in my car. I also have a Manfrotto 055 tripod, which is here. It's doing the look down view. A little KNF concept tripod as a backup, which is this one. I've got plenty of these light stands as backups. Again, I don't necessarily use them all for weddings, but you never know when you want an extra angle and you just want to stick it on here. And I've got a little tilty tripod head thing that I can attach this to. So if I want an extra angle on a tripod or whatever, and I don't have a spare, I can just use a light stand. I always take a cool bag with me with, you know, some drinks and snacks and stuff. You never know when your food at a venue is going to get screwed up. And, you know, I trust most of the ones I work with, but the ones I don't know, I always make sure I bring food, because you just never know what's going to happen. And it's best to have food on hand rather than having to search for 20 minutes to find a shop or something nearby. And then lastly, the thing that people don't really talk about is transport. So I'm going to interrupt myself here. I had actually recorded a whole segment on the car I drive and keeping it maintained, but the very next day I might have had a little crash. One missed turning to a wedding venue, and one extremely stupid maneuver later, I'd managed to write off my beloved Pedro, the 2016 Volkswagen Passat, as well as the other car involved. Now, thankfully, no one was injured, and I was able to sort cover for the wedding I was supposed to shoot, but it has left me with a fair amount of anxiety and quite a loss of confidence, especially given ultimately it was my responsibility. Thankfully, I have now sourced a new car, so I've got Simon, the Skoda Octavia, and hopefully that should last me for a fair few years. However, the whole experience has taught me quite a lot, and I've got a few points that I wanted to share before I end the video. So the first one's probably going to be pretty obvious, and that is, if you happen to miss your turning, just let the sat-nav redirect you. Don't attempt any stupid maneuvers like I did. If you're a few minutes late, you're a few minutes late. It's better to be late than not to be able to show up at all. Number 2 is make sure you have comprehensive business use car insurance. Now, I actually made the mistake of not having that. I only had commuting insurance, thinking that was enough, but technically it wasn't. In the UK, if you drive to more than one place of work, technically you do need business insurance, and the insurer could choose not to cover you if you get into an accident. Thankfully, mine did cover me. However, you can't assume that they always would, and one of the stipulations was I had to change my cover to business use immediately, which I did. Again, lesson learned, and it could have been a lot worse, but I'm telling everyone now, if you do any kind of self-employed work, not just weddings, get business cover. Number 3 is try to arrange to have a backup car of some description. Now, I'm in a fortunate position where my wife and I had actually recently bought a second car, mostly for her use, but also as a backup car for me. It's just a little Toyota Aygo, but it gets the job done, and actually came in really useful for the wedding I had just a couple of days after the crash. It meant I didn't have to rent a car, and it meant I could just get straight on with it. Now, I appreciate that's a very fortunate position, but if you have a friend or family member that you can borrow a car of, it's good to know that you've got a few backups, and I'd probably advise getting onto their policy again with business use, just in case your car has an issue, whether it's crashing or it just doesn't start. It's just good to have. And I'd also add that it's good to have something like AA or RIC cover just in case you break down, because again, it's the sort of thing that would happen on the way to work. Number 4 is service your vehicle. It doesn't matter if it's a little Citroen C1 or a massive Nissan Navara. You've got to service your vehicle once a year or every 10,000 miles, or at very least make sure you're changing the oil regularly. That also includes things like brakes and tyres. Again, they're perishable things, but it's best to keep them maintained than to have them go wrong and potentially cost you way more and maybe mean that you're not even able to show up for the wedding, which wouldn't be great. And lastly, this is something I'm just in the process of adding, which is indemnity insurance. Now, that can cover you for things like illness or some kind of event that prevents you from attending a wedding. It means if you do have to provide a refund or hire an associate, you may get a payout from your insurance, which might cover you for the loss of earnings. Anyway, that will about do it from me. If this was interesting or helpful, please do consider subscribing. I'm trying to upload a couple of times a month, and I've got a few videos in the pipeline. So yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.